All right, Kamaljeet, give me a countdown.
All right. Okay. Tirikita gadigina tatida, tirikita gadigina tatida, tirikita gadigina tatida.
Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah, I did it right. Oh my god, I was stressing about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a nice high. It was a little fast.
Oh,
Your
no.
Pandit is improving.
Yeah. No, you got to do it fast. Although that way people can't really calculate it with you.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I have to do it a little bit fast.
So, everybody, welcome to another episode of Absolute Focus. We have a really cool guest with us today. But before we get into that, let me just talk about something, okay? When you make music with somebody, it's a very intimate relationship.
Yeah.
You're sharing emotions, feelings, right? You're giving each other looks. Basically, like when to stop your tihai.
Yeah, and turn you off.
And so we're husband and wife, and it's like
Yeah, yes.
it's a lot of people like you'll be giving a signal to like, hey, finish your tihai up, but people will be like, oh, they're so in love.
Yeah.
But today, you're cheating on me.
No, I'm sorry.
You're having a tabla affair with our guest.
It's a raga affair.
I can't believe I invited him into my house. Oh my god.
I know.
The disrespect.
I'm sitting here.
know.
We're gonna have a
You're
tabla
right
fight.
here. I know you have to fight
Fight
my
for your honor.
That's right. That's right. After the concert, though. You know.
Well, all jokes aside, we have a really awesome guest.
do.
He's like such a genuine person. We're meeting him for the first time today, but
Yep.
we've known about each other for quite a while. We have
Yeah.
like a lot of mutual friends.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing percussionist. We're gonna get into like his whole story. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody welcome Sameer Gupta.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
All
you,
the from
guys.
NYC.
I know, man.
Yeah.
I think this is the furthest away we've had a guest from.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Justin Kamaljeet. It's really nice to be here. You guys have an awesome show. I'm so psyched to be here.
Well, thanks for being
Yeah,
on
thanks, man.
and taking away time from your Disneyland trip.
I know, man.
The Disneyland trip had to happen.
Yeah.
But I was surprised that they didn't have like a more awesome Desi Indian section, like with Aladdin Jasmine, like Indian food,
Oh, really?
like
I think so, yeah.
you know, like ban, like you know, like really like go in there, like chai, like proper, you know,
Oh, that's
and like a
I
henna
thought they liked
station.
I thought they liked their detail. Perhaps not.
Yeah. So get this. This is like, I mean, this is not. It just reminded me what you like. Some corporate agency, and I don't know how they found us. They reach out to us and they're like, "There's a giant theme park in Orlando,
Oh yeah.
and they want they have a new exhibit that they're releasing, and it's like an international theme, and they want musicians to play 5 shows a day."
Okay,
And
it's one of those kind of gigs.
over
Yeah.
the course of 3 months. And then I was like, I don't want to play the same music. And they're like, no, you have full creative control. It's up to you.
Wow.
And it's like 5 15-minute shows a day.
Right.
And they're going to give you like, you know, a full apartment, a car, crazy money, all that stuff. And they're like, send us, you know, all your pictures, bio, all
Blah
that
blah
stuff.
blah.
Yeah.
Clips and all that. And I was like, okay, I don't know how we're going to do this, but like, I'm
Might
sure
as
my
well.
3-year-old will love. This is when Bismad was 3. I was like, she'll love that we live at Disneyland,
Right.
or Disney World.
Yeah.
And
Well, we didn't know that at that point.
I think, yeah. So as we kept going through these rounds, like they're like, okay, yeah, they've narrowed it down, and like, oh, and by the way, now it's Disney World, right?
We can show you
Yeah,
our
we
cards.
can show you and all that. And so we keep going. This over the course of a month, we keep narrowing it down. They're like, it's down to 2, and then we ended up losing.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, who'd we lose to? Like, who were the other guys? I may even know them because we're all in the same music
Yeah.
world family.
we thought it would be all Indian.
They're like, oh, it was this like 8-person trapeze.
trapeze artist group.
artist group.
We're like what?
And I was like, why was a santur and tabla in the running?
In the same competition. Imagine if Indian like music festival competitions were like that,
Oh my goodness.
where you had like the tabla players competing with like the Bharatanatyam like
I know.
makeup
Yeah.
artist.
Yeah. That's how it was.
And we were just so shocked.
What?
Like, how is this?
Oh man, what a
Yeah.
bummer.
To be
was
honest,
probably
I
for the
think it would
best.
have been. It would have been. Really
It would have been
tough.
insane.
Yeah.
think it
I
was
can't
for
even
the
imagine. I mean,
best.
seeing those bands at Disneyland, I was like thinking to myself, like, this is like a This is like working for an orchestra.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you have like probably good job security and all those
Yeah.
things. So I think it's like sometimes it's a different kind of thing. Like, I think that for a lot of us, like we start out just playing music independently. You know,
Yeah.
it's a creative path, it's a passion, and then like you realize if you can get things in order, like you can actually make a living at this kind of thing. And it's like finding that balance, and then like we have kids and throw the whole thing into array, disarray. So
That's definitely just disarray.
the array is shattered at that point. But I think it's interesting to think about how like musicians do end up having to strike a balance with those kinds of things. You have really great opportunities which will provide so much stability, but then at the end, like maybe your passion and your creativity and your like drive and your struggle sort of becomes like a little bit clouded. Like you actually you don't struggle as much, and maybe then those notes come out a little different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear that. I mean, in there's such a wide landscape of Indian classical musicians, and of course, a lot of them, like we know, are like descendants, are children of great ustads and great maestros. And so sometimes when I hear some of the younger generation, they don't have that same like depth or fire or kind of story in what they're playing. And I wonder if it's
I think it comes out in the music as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's because like their parents struggled a little harder than them, and they just kind of, when they're playing a note and going doing a gig, it's like they don't have to fight for their bread at the end of the gig.
I think that's probably true.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean the same goes for us too. Like, a lot of these great musicians, the music came first.
Yeah,
Wives
absolutely.
were second, children
Absolutely,
were second.
yeah.
Whereas we turn down stuff. Well,
I've turned down stuff because
she got offered to go like on a tour in Nairobi. And,
Wow.
And she turned it down because our kid was young.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that stuff is the part of our lives that a lot of people don't realize has changed from the previous generation of Indian classical musicians. Like you hear stories about our teachers and these great gurus, and they were like practicing 12 hours a day. It's like,
well, then that means they didn't talk to their wife.
Like you obviously, didn't spend enough time at the dinner table or cooking a meal for everybody. But it's like at the same time, there's a funny way in which that's like elevated and that's like really looked at as this like powerful position. But in a way, sometimes I look at that now and I'm like, I'm glad I spent time with my family. Like I like that, and I like that part of my life. And it's kind of like, am I going to be a human being first, or am I just always going to be a musician first?
Then I think it does show up in our music in different ways too. Mm-hmm. So
totally.
And plus there's a lot of exaggeration in that older generation.
There is.
You think so?
I practice 23 hours a day.
Are you trying to tell me that the Bollywood mentality of exaggerating everything has filtered into Indian classical music?
That was always there, man.
No, Indian classical is, I think, where it started.
Totally. Man, maybe with like Tansen, lighting himself on fire with Rag Deepak.
Oh yeah, like Deepak. Yeah. Deepak, man, do you see what it did to me?
Look at these burns.
Don't worry. Let me just sing some. What is it? The rain one.
Malhar,
Malhar, and all that. It's all good. It's all good.
No, I love that. There's so many stories, and they just get more and more insane. Like one I love, right? Is like
Chinese whispers, right?
There's like this story of how the tabla came about, right? I don't know if you've heard this one.
None of those stories match.
None of them match, but they're all brilliant, right? So like this might be a mashup of several, but the one I heard was like basically this guy was like playing tabla, practicing. Well, it was a single pakawaj, right? Yeah. And he wouldn't stop playing. He just like wouldn't stop practicing. His wife comes in, is like, "What is your problem? You've been practicing for 12 hours straight." Gets her axe from the outside woodshed and just cuts his pakawaj in half, right? And then he picks it up and puts it on like this, and is like, "Oh, thank you,
works,
baby." Like now it's like so much easier to play. And then he just kept practicing.
That's a hilarious story. Can you imagine that?
Oh man! And the one I like the best actually is two dueling pakawaj players.
Yeah,
you've heard that one too.
Oh wait, I've not heard this one. What's this
You
one?
tell it, Jess. It's good.
It's basically the same story, but
Jess, you're ruining it. Okay, so basically two pakawaj players, right? And they're like doing their like duel, right?
Yeah.
Percussionist, just like major cockfight, right? So like they basically are saying, okay, I'm gonna outplay this, me and Jess head to head, right? Jess is like goes for it. I answer with his composition, right? And then I play my composition, more complicated. Back and forth, back and forth. Finally, Jess is like, you know what? Like, I'm going to pull out my big composition, my hardest composition. Does it. And then I'm like sweating. I'm like, whoa, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try and do it. And I do it, right? And I'm like, whew. And then I bust my hardest composition. And then Jess is like, okay, this is trouble. And he like prays to his guru, he takes a moment, just as he's about to hit lightning comes down, strikes
I didn't hear the
in
lightning
the middle,
part.
and then it becomes two pieces, and he
Oh
plays
my
the
God.
composition
I
effortlessly.
like this story.
Oh, see, mine was different.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
what's
know?
yours?
I didn't know the lightning part. Mine was much more like anticlimactic. Mine was the same thing, except the tabla player just got up and hit the other guy's pakawaj when he couldn't play it.
That was like
I think that's actually
3-year-old
probably the real story.
Oh, okay. Your story is way better.
Yeah.
But
So like
they're
you were
all
saying,
true.
it's very.
So they're all true. That's
All of them
are
are
like
true.
the origin. Yeah, there's like
Yeah.
literally 8 different origin
I
stories.
wish I had
of
an
the tabla.
origin story like for this one too.
I'm
You
sure
make
you
one
could
up.
make one up.
I should make
That's
one up.
our
I mean, that's
tradition.
all they've done, and then they say, this is 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, oh well, we're an oral tradition, so you can't really prove me wrong.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Prove it.
What was that Sandeep line when?
Oh yeah.
So the guy that
Mozart
runs their
was
bar,
in-
Yeah.
he was negotiating with I don't
I think
know.
it was a South Bank Center, or
Yeah.
a big prestigious center where they present
to
lots
have
of highbrow
like
music.
have that festival as part of like
Of
their
their
series.
thing.
Okay, cool.
Not just like that we're renting out your hall type of situation.
Yeah.
Right. More serious.
So
partnership.
basically, she's like, no, we can't do that, blah, blah, blah. And he just said, listen, when your Mozart was in his nappies, our music was already 2,000 years developed.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
That is an awesome line.
And
And then she was like, "You know what? You're right."
Yeah.
Yeah, she was.
yeah.
Wow.
I don't
Was
know
it-
what
I
her
don't-
response was, but they are now part of that
festival is
series. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if that has a skill to do with being a booker as much as being like a proper Indian negotiator in the market. You know,
That's
where
some
you
good
like
storytelling.
you know exactly how much you're going to pay for that, and you know, oh my gosh. I mean, it goes to show that like strategies in negotiation are just up for interpretation. No one else could possibly do that than at that moment other
Yeah.
than that guy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Legend. I love
Legend.
that story.
Indeed. I love
Yeah.
that story too.
So why don't you tell us like let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
What was little Sameer doing with like percussion?
Well, when I was in my nappies, no, I actually, got turned on to music kind of through my own devices. My brother was very into guitar, and we were living in New York, and I was sort of just getting into playing drum set with him, and it was like, the late 80s, early 90s, so it was a lot of like, Zeppelin, a lot of like the classics, like, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and just like a lot of guitar-driven
cool.
blues music, and so I learned drums first, like in that way. Before that, I was doing like more like concert band and orchestral, like American school system music learning. But my earliest memory actually of music is when in elementary school, the music teacher basically played us some Bach. And it was a Brandenburg concertos, which have like a really beautiful trumpet in the lead, and it has those sort of like streams of Bach sort of counterpoint, and and it's just, I was completely hypnotized by it, and I remember going up to her and saying, "What, can I have that cassette?" She gave me the cassette, and I wore it out. Like the ink was gone, after a while, because I just would not stop listening to it. And and then I just wanted to kind of study and get into music, and it was very hard for me. Western notation I couldn't really understand. I went through trombone, I went through piano, and then I eventually got to drums, and I was like, this just makes a lot of sense to me, and I felt great about it. It was very different than what other people in my family were doing. Even on my mom's side and my dad's side, no one was taking music very seriously.
Okay.
So that felt really good to me to
What did
form.
you think when you were pursuing that?
I think it evolved. I think the early stages were cute.
Yeah.
Then it got to like,
man,
what's
he
he
won't
doing?
stop.
Yeah, like what's going on? Like he has something to do today.
Yeah.
Like, and then it sort of became like, okay, now we need to think about how serious he's taking it, because I wanted to go to college and get a music degree. And that was a very big check for my parents, I think. Like, I mean, not like a check, but like
Yeah.
that was like a real moment of like, we need to take a look at what's going on with our son, and we need to kind of think about that. But I was like a good kid. I was obsessed with music. Like in high school, I just hung out in the band room and marching band and carrying around 50-pound set of quads and, doing all that stuff, and musical theater. Like I was just into all that stuff. I was into the whole gamut of arts and music and how it integrated with that. And so even to the level of putting on a theatrical show, like, and understanding all the elements that go into that, from the costume to the lighting to the stage to the musicians in the pit orchestra, So I was really, really into that. And then, after in college, actually, it was interesting. I kind of was fighting against the administration there. The administration was really conservative Western classical. So it was pianists, vocalists, and orchestral players like flute and violin. They didn't really have a strong percussion
And where is this?
thing. In San Jose, Santa Clara University.
Okay.
Pretty conservative department. I think they've even gotten more conservative possibly since then. But I think that for me, their conservativeness actually drove me to really push like what I could do, right? So I didn't see it as something that I had to kind of accept as much as something that I had to overcome. Like I was basically like, I want to study jazz music. I want to understand the history of jazz music. And I made them basically give me a person on the faculty who could give me a sort of independent research on jazz history. They didn't offer that in the program, right? So, and that person, even him, I had to be like, I want to look at Mingus, I want to look at Duke Ellington, I want to look at all these things. Yeah, I wanted to tell him very specifically what I wanted to check out.
And how did you know to ask like for those things?
Just through my own
research?
curiosity. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it all kind of like, my brother was the one who brought John Coltrane's Africa brass sessions to the house, right? And he brought like Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. Like he brought those recordings to the house. And so that was kind of my earlier taste of jazz music. And then I just ran with it. I was just like, this is something very profound to me. I think that the improvisation was a huge draw. Like I could hear the impetus for the decision making, right? Like the fact that there was a moving foundation that all the musicians were kind of agreeing on, as well as it being a foundation, like it was something that was fluid and it was something that kind of could be approached in a various number of ways. That was very compelling to me. And so in the midst of playing orchestras and symphonies and going on tours to play like Carmina Burana and Brahms, I was just into jazz and basically ready to go into jazz music after I graduated. And one cool thing in college that I remember is I basically formed like a 30-person jazz like improvisational group. Wow. And it was just open to anyone. It was just kind of like I wanted to get everyone together, and the music department didn't have quite as much of an open door. So it ended up being like a lot of different people came in from all different majors, and we would just get together and just play like a blues for 2 hours, and people would line up and just improvise and blow. And some didn't even know how to really play on a blues. They just knew how to play a little bit, so they would just have fun. And I remember feeling great about that and being like, you know what, like this is a significant moment for all of us, right? Like it wasn't even like a big deal. Like we were at a dive bar, you know, just like lined up and jamming. And it was like me and the bass player. The bass player happened to be Indian. His name was like Sai or something. We would just play like funk grooves for 2 hours straight, and everyone would line up and just blow. Trombone, trumpet, some Western classical music majors who didn't know how to improvise would come and try and improvise, and they'd be like freaking out. You know, they don't know how to improvise. Like, so
it's a hard thing to do, man. To improvise, you've got to.
If you don't know, it is like the hardest thing. It's so scary. And I was realizing that with a lot of the Western classical players I was in the department with, is like they don't improvise. And even simple stuff, like I was like, oh look, we all know Heart and Soul. And I was like, let's just make those all minor chords. And they were like, you know, like they couldn't even like fathom like that I could do that. Right? It's kind of like that person who's like, you can't play Santur on electronic music. It's it's like, watch me. Like you're looking at me do it right now. So what do you have to say? You know, you're gonna be like, no, you can't do what I'm seeing you do. You know, so it's like, it's really just about breaking that mold. And in a way, I think even from early days, I was like a little bit anti-establishment. And I think college kind of pushed me even further for that. And then after I graduated, I was just full in jazz music, drum set, like really only. I was like kind of into Indian classical music, and I was probably like 22 or 23 at the time when I kind of went to India, and I was at my mom's in Delhi. I went to my mom's house, which is in a Jain colony, again, super conservative. And I was like, you know, Masi, I just want to like learn a little tabla, and just a local teacher is fine. Like I didn't want to like embrace that like cultural baggage at that point. You know,
just wanted to get a taste.
I wanted to check it out. And I was also like, I'm a professional jazz drummer. Like, you know, I'm not going to like, I didn't want to be with someone who's going to be like, who are you? What do you do? Like, da da da. I just wanted to have like someone who would just treat me like any other student, like a local teacher. And I think that has always kind of stuck with me in a way, like just folks, you know, like we don't need our egos to be that big in order to really connect. And so it was really great to have a local, you know, player who just teaches kids keyboard and silly instruments. And then he also knows tabla. He sat with me, this like 23-year-old guy. And after like the 2 days with him, he's like, you're really serious. I was like, yeah. I was like, I'm used to like practicing in the practice room for 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, you know? And he's like, okay. He's like, I'm going to show you everything I know then. He's like, I'm a tabla player, you know, Dilli Grana, you know, Shafet Ahmed Khan was his guru,
awesome.
right? Dilli. And so for like 5 days, I sat with him, like 4 hours with him and 4 hours on my own, and totally just like my arms were like messed up, like just like
Feeling the burn.
Oh, feeling the burn, dude. And so I was, and then I was like really worried that I like messed up my hands, you know, because I was like, I gotta go back and do some gigs. Like, what have I done? And he was just like, you just gotta play through it, you know. And I was like, okay.
Cool.
I was like, okay. And so I played through it, and it worked out. And then, you know, when as I was leaving, he was just like, you know, he's like, it would make me really happy if I just like heard about you all the way here, like as someone who's a tabla player. And I was like, man, like that is awesome,
so
you know.
sweet.
It was so sweet.
What was
And,
his name?
I wish I could remember. I remember his face. A lot of times when I meditate on like the idea of guru and what it is, like I just let my mind go with different teachers I've had, and I often end up at him, you know, which is really
really
cool.
nice.
Yeah. And such a long time ago. And so then I came back to the Bay Area, right? And I was like, I should find some Indian classical musicians because I'm into it now. And
Are you listening at this point? Like, do you go to concerts?
You know, I wouldn't
cassettes?
say. It was funny. I had this funny idea of like trying to be self-taught. And I think that that's like a delusion for a lot of Indian classical players who start out, that they can be self-taught.
Yeah.
Mainly because it is an oral tradition. That's no joke.
Yeah.
Like you need to be with people in order to understand how to communicate, like the accent, the flavor of the music, you know, those things are critical. Like, and you can always kind of tell like some musicians who don't fully have that. Like they didn't get in front of someone and sit there and work out the exact gesture.
Yeah.
Like, where do you bend the baya? Where do you bend the re when you're going to go? You know, like how important those little moves are. It's like dance or like painting, you know, like it's so important, and you can't get that from a book or even like a website. You know what I mean? So I think that really, in the end, was something that I just had to get to myself, where I had to realize that I have to sit with someone. I really have to ask the questions. I have to be with someone. And I was very lucky to be with people who I respected a lot. And I felt like they knew me more than, you know, someone who just is like, I'm paying for lessons, right? So I think that's also a very interesting thing. I mean, paying for lessons is like how it was done in my life. Like you went and got drum lessons and you paid. And once you got into Indian classical music, it's like, that's like a very gray area. And it can be very uncomfortable, actually. Definitely. And there's etiquette and there's all these things. And so, you know, just to, I guess, continue a little more, I got back from India and I went to the Al Akbar College, which is an amazing institution, and sat in front of Pandit Chaudhary. Awesome. And he was just kind of like, you know, your technique, your ring finger on your daya hand is not entirely correct. If you sit with this disciple of mine, he'll get your hand right. And then you can start attending classes, right? And I was just like, I knew that disciple, and I was like, you know, I don't want to sit with that dude. Like, I've heard him play, like his teka's kind of busted, like his tempo, his light, like everything was not really like there for my sense. And I'm not like a novice player. Like I know like the difference between Swapanji's sense of light and this guy. And I was like, you know, I don't want to necessarily go in this way. Like, I don't want to go institutioned again, you know? Yeah. So I was very, very lucky that I found like great musicians who weren't affiliated with the college, sitar players, sarod players, tabla players. Actually, a disciple of Tari Khan Sahib, Farhan Qureshi.
Oh, I know him. Yeah.
So Farhan and a lot of the musicians around him who were great, like so serious, you know, so serious, but also really like just good folks that are carrying their own like line and their own lives, you know. And so hung out with them a lot, and honestly that was the best schooling. That was like my graduate degree in Indian classical music. It was like I was hanging out with that community. Like I would say, you know, I mean, the sitarist in there, a good friend, Srinivas Reddy, he I would sit with him for upwards of 6 to 8 hours a day. I would sort of clock into my day job and then just come to his house. And I was like, let's see how long I can sustain this for. Because I was like, I need to just practice. Like, I'm getting schooled by him, you know, and we're both riyaz every day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then sometimes the late night, right? Every day.
That's amazing.
For 4 years. We did that for 4 years. I thought about it, reflected on it later, and I was like, my gosh, that was 4 years, almost every day, just making sure I was with this dude and practicing Tintal, and he was on me. He was just like, "Why are you playing teka like that?" And I was like, "Well, I listened to Alaraka Khansab," and he's like, "You got to know, like Alaraka Khansab is not playing like the straightest teka. Like him and Raviji have such a ESP that like they're just dancing with each other, right?" And I didn't realize that. He's like, "You need to listen to Kanai Datta. You need to listen to, you know, me and Shakuta Hussain, you know, like all these like really, really just like kind of like old school cats, you know." And that's when I sort of appreciated the aesthetic of accompanying, right? Because sometimes we listen to these masters on recordings and we think that's how you accompany, but they're at like, they're in outer space with their abilities, you know what I mean? And we are here kind of being like, what is the building blocks? Like A, B, C?
That's amazing that he could tell you like that, because not everyone even listens like that.
Right.
So that's wonderful.
It's great to get that kind of schooling. I'm very grateful for that. And then
4 years of it.
yeah, 4 years. It was like going to school for me.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, and it was actually great because I was with Srini's guru, who's Partha Chatterjee, who's great, and he's like considered one of the kind of only disciples of Pandit Nikhil Banerjee, right? Because Pandit Nikhil Banerjee didn't want to carry a guru mantle with him, so like Partha Chatterjee lived with Nikhil Banerjee like the last like, I don't know, 20 years of his life, maybe more, something like that. And so that, like, I don't know, like, just to me, I still got a really great perspective on Indian classical music and the guru-shishya relationship and how the depth is achieved without it being something that I had to personally kind of, like, sign over to, right? Because I think inside me, there's a bit of a struggle with, like, how these power dynamics play. I mean, I think about this stuff socially a lot too, you know, like guru bandhana. It's like, you know, that's as like you're marrying your guru, you know, and it's definitely. Like, I don't know. My parents are also like, what, you know, and I'm also kind of like, what, you know. So I think it's something that I have a huge amount of respect for, but it's something that I've also just sort of
seems foreign,
a little bit foreign, because it's like I think I've come out of a different story.
Absolutely,
And even though I've sat with Zakirji, you know, and like for a few years for his like once a week that he does in Northern California, I was also like, I this does not feel right to me. Like 1 week out of the year, and then it's like a lot of the people there, it's like such a mark of pride that they're a disciple of Zakirji.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are these people really carrying here? Are they carrying their music with them, or are they carrying, you know, a lineage that they're sort of a flag of some kind, you know? And so I don't know, my own mind goes to those things, you know, and I think about like the sort of social implications and the way that even patriarchy and the way that power dynamics have played out over generations. And I kind of believe that we're in a different place, and growing up in America and questioning things and being critical of the things that people take for granted as far as like what is guru, you know, dakshina, I think that's that's when you pay, right? Yeah. Like there's the story of Dronacharya and Eklavya, right? You heard that?
Yeah. I know the Eklavya one.
Yeah, so like he basically Eklavya is a great archer, right? Yeah. But he asked Dronacharya, this is in the Mahabharata for all of you out there.
The great Mahabharata.
Mahabharata, if you've seen the 70s television show.
I grew up on that. My mom loved that stuff.
The 70s television show was the marker for when you could go to the airport with minimum traffic, I think, right? Like you could get across town with minimum traffic when the Mahabharata television shows.
My mom watched that all the time.
Oh
I was
my
like,
God.
what is going on? Why is there so many arrows? Why is there a big... Why is on his head?
Oh my God.
I thought it was real because I was so young. I was like,
that was the
so
one
long
Hindi
ago
I couldn't understand that at all. It was like so should the Hindi. I was like, okay, I don't know
I
what
didn't understand
saying.
it either, but I don't know why I just sat there because maybe my mom was just. I was like, I don't know what.
I only remember
everyone is
clips
gathered
here
around the
and
TV.
Yeah.
Oh, you should see it. It's a classic. Anyway, the story of Eklavya is that Drona is like the Pandav's guru, right? The big shots, right?
Yeah.
No. Am I wrong about that? No, he's right. Yeah. Arjuna and Bhim, all those
all
guys,
learned
their
from him,
guru is Dronacharya, right?
He's like a badass.
He's a total badass, right?
Yeah.
And so then this guy, Eklavya, this young kid, says, Drona, I want to study with you. Drona's like, I can't take any disciples. Arjuna is my archer disciple. And so Eklavya goes into the forest and builds a little statue of Drona and does, you know, guru darshan, and he like worships the image of Drona. And then word gets out, or Drona finds that like there's this amazing archer that was able to do incredible things. Like he was able to make a dog go quiet by shooting arrows in its mouth without killing it, right? Like just things that are like superhuman. So Drona's like, who is this archer? And then they find out that it's this kid, Eklavya. And Drona says, who's your guru? And he says, you're my guru, Dronacharya. And he says, well,
I've never seen him before.
I've
in my
never
life,
seen
friend.
you before. And he's like, there's a statue I make of you, you're my guru. And he's like, well, then you have to give me guru dakshina. And he makes him cut off his thumb.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I don't know, but that is not too far off, I think, from sometimes how it feels.
From sometimes. Yeah.
I think it needs to change nowadays.
I-
That life is not what this society is about now.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of why I think like organizations like Raga Massive and what you guys are doing is like so important, because it sort of draws light to how far gone some of these things are,
Yeah. So I mean, we'll get into Raga Massive before.
Yeah.
But like, so I'm conflicted about some of this, right?
Yeah.
Because
you have a great guru.
I know, but it's like I couldn't envision like playing at the level that I played at if I like went to him every Monday and gave him his fee.
Right.
Like, and I think it's because I developed, and maybe this isn't like Guru Shishya or whatever. I don't know what the word for it is. I developed a personal like bond.
Yeah.
And my best lessons, and Kamaljeet has like said, like had
But
experiences like this
he's
too.
not like a guru though. He's like a family member. Cause
Yeah, so I'm
he's
also in a different boat.
He's so lucky that
My dad and
your
him
dad
were
is like brothers.
friends before I was born.
And I think that is the
So it's-
thing. It
But
becomes a gray area. Like
yeah.
that's so real.
So my best lessons are at Carl's Jr. or at Denny's
Word.
or on the drive home,
Yeah.
like from a concert,
Yeah.
or like it's because of that personal bond. So I don't know, like what is that? So I know that the Guru Shishya relationship has been abused. Like
I mean,
terribly.
both exist. There's a
Yeah.
bunch
Right.
of disciples who don't have that.
Yeah.
Right. But they are also like, this is my guru.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's not, but it's just that it's like kind of trying to oversimplify maybe something that is actually a bit more
It's complicated. It's a very complicated relationship.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the word is.
I've had both. So I grew up having lessons every week with my my mama who got me into music. That Shri Dharambir sing. So every week we'd go have a lesson. Here's Rag Yaman. Here's a couple of dance. Go practice it.
Yeah.
Done those dance? No? Okay, just practice it. Come back again. Oh, you did another one? Okay, let's go to the Antara now. So that's what I grew up on. But then I also became a disciple of Pandit Shivkumar Sharma, which is mind-blowingly awesome.
Yeah.
And that was very different because that was you go there, you soak in everything he got to give you. You don't go every week. I see him like once a year if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Or if he comes to my
And
country.
now that we have two kids,
yeah.
it's even harder. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, but then I also have the true gems that he gives me, and I'm like, oh, I've got to hold on to this stuff, and the relationship is much more different than I had with my uncle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I see both sides. There's good things
Yeah.
and bad things with both.
And then there's a bit of the iklava in both of us.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
like we Shivji and Ustadji are in our lives every hour.
Yeah.
Like not
Yeah.
even every day.
Yeah.
Like they go through our mind right all the time. Like you have
Yeah.
stuff on your phone all the time. I have
Yeah.
stuff on my phone all the time.
yeah, they're all
And there's a bit of iklava there too. Or iklava. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Lavya.
Lavya. Okay.
Eklavya.
The reason I think I'm pronouncing it wrong is because somebody from India wrote to my Ustadji. They sent him a letter written in
Oh,
Hindi.
actually, somebody actually said that, right?
Yeah, somebody sent him it was this like giant, 2-page letter,
Yeah.
handwritten in Hindi. And
Yeah.
obviously my Ustadji reads Urdu.
Oh.
So he had to go find somebody to translate. He's like, what does this say? And Ustadji even said, like, I let it sit for like a while. Like,
Wow.
and then I picked it up. It was fine. Somebody came over. I was like, oh, you speak Hindi or you can read Hindi. Can you read this for me? And it was this that like I've never met you and I probably never will. Like, I don't have money and blah, blah, blah. But you are my guru.
Wow.
And like, I have a picture of you and
Yeah.
you are my guru. And then he told the
Eklavya
Like,
story.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Wow. I mean, I think those are profound experiences for students and people who are trying to connect with music. And I would never dismiss that as like something that is like wrong or trivial or shallow in any way, right? I mean, for me, like, I feel like I heard so much about guru when I was trying to learn this. You need to find a guru. When the students write, the guru will come, And I feel like, finding Pandit and Nindo Chatterjee was a very incredible moment for me. Like that felt like very magical. Like he was kind of through a logical progression of people that I knew at the time. I realized like, wow, I could study with him. I could meet him and I could see what he's like. And I really, really loved it, And I think that to this day, it's just hard to kind of like make it work in the same way as like some other peers that I have work. Like a lot of people I know can go to India every year. They can spend 2 or 3 months.
Yeah,
and then Guruji will come to Brooklyn for like 2 weeks in 1 year. And it's like, and that's like in the school year. And so it's like so impossible, even though it's like a 15-minute drive. It's like nerve-wracking, like 11 o'clock at night. And he's like, you can come now. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I only could come over, like, and do that. And so it's really...
So when I learned, there was... So Ustadji would come to California, and then when I got into my teens, I would go see him somewhere, wherever he was.
Yeah.
That could be like Toronto or Chicago or New Jersey or Texas. Like I've flown like quite a bit of places to see him. Yeah. But there's I went all in.
Yeah.
If he said come at like 1 a.m. and I have like an exam at 6 a.m. or like that I got to get up for, I went.
Yeah.
I took the B instead of the A and like I
right.
went all in.
Like it's so
but that's
interesting.
hard.
It is, and I think that for me,
and now I can't. So I think last year was it last year, or was it the year before? I'm 39, I'm going to be 39 in August. I think last year or the year before was the first time that I said, Ustadji, I've got to go home.
Yeah.
I'd never left a room until he said, Jacinda, don't you have a school tomorrow? Or don't you have work tomorrow? Like, you should go.
Yeah.
Until I didn't leave until that was said. And I didn't say, like, hey, I got to go. Like, I got to go to work tomorrow.
Right, right.
And I think last year was the first, and it was my kids that, like, I know that they get up at 6. Very early, and then they need me the next day, and then I also do work, and then I can't do it all.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, I felt so guilty, and it's this weird relationship that
totally.
Dude, who cares that you have to? Like, that's normal that you have to go. You're not even, and like a lot of times, like we're not talking about music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we were watching the news.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And like, he's like, "What's Trump saying now?" And I gotta like translate or whatever. And like, it's not even musical, but that's that weird relationship. And
totally.
Sometimes it is like.
I think it's interesting for me. I feel like I made those choices where I put my life on pause for like music. I kind of remember doing that around communities of musicians.
Yeah. Like your story in the Bay.
Yeah, like when I was in college and that kind of thing. And then even like later, like the musicians that I played with, like the bands that I played with, and those groups where there was such a strong sense of brotherhood and a sense of this is a family because we're playing music together, and we had these experiences of making music and going into those places, that those really, really transformative musical experiences that happen. Those are the things that I've always gravitated towards, like kind of like putting those above other things. I'll be like, I'm going to stay up all night because I know that this group is counting on me to
sort of
do
like
this and this
form of community service.
Yeah, I would say the community is kind of more what have valued above like the personal thing. Like if one person is able to betray the trust of a member of my community, but not me, I'll be more likely to think about my community and say, the value of this team has been maybe affected, and I need to rethink what I think about this individual person, for example, or like if someone is like manipulating members of a group, it's like, do we allow ourselves to be fragmented by a powerful person, by a gig, or by a guru, like whatever it might be, like some sort of value that people perceive. Gigs is actually probably the biggest culprit, right? It's like there's such an inherent like competitiveness and a predatory nature in being a freelance musician. People don't even realize that they're fragmenting the community, by not realizing we're all kind of in the same team.
So
absolutely,
what you just said is the number one reason we started this.
Word.
And when we're just sitting on the couch and talking to people, like it's led to so many great conversations and a sense of community that we're all in this together. And there's been legitimate, like, what's the word, financial benefit in terms of we got together, like the few of us musicians, and we just said, like, we started talking openly about what we charge. And then they were like,
Huge.
well, let's just bump it up. And so we bumped it up, and then there's
That's
you know,
right.
and we bumped it up, and it helped all of us.
That's right.
And this is just with like this is only like 14 or 15 episodes. And like
that's like one of the strongest moves. Like, I mean, because by bringing our community of like independent freelance people together to realize that we all are actually defining our industry standards, right? Like if we have an industry standard that's like $50 is okay. There are people who take it for $50, take a gig for $50. Those people have very different needs in their life than someone who has 2 kids, is renting, is like has a car.
You guys are in New York, man.
Yeah.
It's like $1 million a foot.
I mean, the great thing is like we did that too. Like I remember the first time that a festival basically approached a couple of members of our community, and they approached me with one contract and they approached another person with a different contract. I basically was like, this contract is unacceptable. The other person got a different deal, and they're like, we're okay with that. When we learned that, I said, hey, you know, it's come to my attention that a colleague of mine has this kind of arrangement with you. We would be willing to accept that arrangement. And they were like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, we'll give you the same arrangement as someone else. And it was like much more better terms. So I wouldn't have known that if that communication
so I think
wasn't
talking
there.
about everything and just being open and realize we're all in this together.
Exactly.
So we got a gig in Canada. And like they gave us an offer. I immediately texted
the people
that played there last year. And I said, what'd you guys get?
Yeah.
And then
they
it
told us
wasn't.
openly.
And I remember the old jazz would have been like,
That'd be
that's
scary.
such an awkward question. You're not supposed to talk about money. That's disrespectful. That's rude. Blah, 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 blah. I just texted and he replied within like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
He's like, this is what we got. And he's like, this is the hotel we stayed at. And then they covered flights, but they didn't cover this. And I'm like, okay.
Perfect. We'll go back with
So then
that.
I went back because the offer that they sent us was
much
one
lower.
quarter of what they paid last year.
Yeah.
And I realized that they wanted to start low so that we could meet in the high. Whereas I think the old me, had I not texted him, I would have just been like, well, it's Canada. They're paying for flights. And like, okay.
We can just take it.
We'll just take it.
Yeah.
So true. You're 100% right. It's like gives us power.
Yeah.
And it gives us an ability to like
we were able
own
to return the favor to them.
Yeah.
Like to this person on another gig.
Totally.
And it worked.
I mean, I think it's actually kind of very interesting to think about what the implicit kind of MO is for an Indian classical or any freelance musician. It's that you are alone. You're a lone wolf, and like you don't have a community of people like that. Like we have to take that initiative to actually educate our community to say that if we can communicate, if we can all get on the same page, we can have a better life. Like we can have a more stable career. We can make livings for ourselves a little easier. And the cool thing about that is that reinforces the idea that this is a viable and fruitful place to dedicate your life, you know, your life's work. And I think then you get back to really early my life where I felt like I had to help my folks understand that, you know, they did not look at having a music career as something that they understood. And there's so many reasons why I think that is understandable, that they didn't get it, you know, like there's no steady paycheck. There's no, you know, sense of this, I can plan for this month's expenses this way. It's like, you know, after 4 weeks of no gigs, it's like I'll get one gig, which will be more money than I've made in 2 months, right? So it's like, how do you reprogram a sense of job security in that situation, right? And also, how do you teach colleagues like musicians the kind of responsibility to be able to say, this is something that someone else has experience with. You can talk to someone else in the community and know that if you're stressed out for a month of financial tightness, you know, there's going to be opportunities that come. Sometimes think 2 months, think 3 months in advance. Don't think month to month. And there's so many things in our society that don't follow that. Everything is built around a month of accounting, right? While for musicians and artists, it really doesn't go month to month. And I think that is just something we all take as our personal struggle. Say, how am I going to carve out a space for myself with a living in this, you know? And how can I make sure I make my rent every month? I can make my food bills every month, right? But then it's like, your gig money is coming in 6 weeks after the gig. You have to keep track
Oh,
of everything.
dude.
You know what I mean? So many things.
We just had some money.
Chasing money is so
It's so
hard.
stressful.
I hate
and
it.
awkward.
Man.
Totally.
Because
just
if you don't
got
get
it.
that check the day of the gig,
You may never get it.
You may
Yeah,
never
because
get it, yeah.
they're now like as organizers, they put a lot of effort into their event, and they're tired.
done, man.
Yeah.
Like they're stressed out.
Oh, yeah.
And so
I've been in the situations
Yeah.
with jazz musicians and jazz festivals too, where the check bounces and the festival person, they're just like, yep, this festival actually just is bankrupt, and and then there's all these musicians who are suddenly like, we need to do a class action thing. Like there's 5 acts who's all, and then it's like, well, are we going to spend a year and a half or 2 years fighting for this?
just
one?
take the loss.
I mean, it's a really, really messed up situation, and I think that the funny thing also is that I think all that contributes to a sense of competitiveness in our industry.
Yeah.
And when you have moves like having a podcast where people realize that there is a sense of community, and it's actually a very wide-reaching, community. It can be anywhere that the internet can go, right?
Yeah.
You can find that community, and you can communicate and have solidarity with people who are also struggling in a similar way.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's switch because we're running a little low on time, and I want to talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Raga Massive.
Yeah.
Like this is you put together musicians, and like you have this whole collective of great artists and talent, and how are you guys not ripping each other's heads off? Like, where are the fights?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not easy. I feel very, very lucky that I've been part of this community, that I am part of that community.
You helped start it, or
I helped start it
Okay.
with maybe 4 or 5, half a dozen other people. It really was about the moment being right. So there was that moment in time, like in 2010, I guess, 2009, where
you guys are almost 10 years old.
let me think for a second. No, actually, it's more like 2011. We're about 8 years old.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking when my daughter was born, it was right around that time. So basically, like we were all hanging out. It's New York, right? So there's so many great musicians. It's very different from like a lot of other parts of the country.
Yeah, so I think
And easy to get to
yeah,
each
your
other.
Easy
geography
to get
also
to each
probably
other.
So
helps.
helpful.
There's a critical mass of venues
Yeah.
of places that want
I think
to put it
that's-
on.
So difficult here to do anything like that because
Yeah.
everything's just spread apart so
Yeah,
much.
we're all
Totally.
far
There's
from each
so
other.
many factors, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't own a car, and there's a few people in our collective who don't own cars. Quite a few,
don't
actually.
need to.
And and I think that's part of what brought us to New York, right? I think that's just kind of a given. It's like all those people came to New York, despite the winters, and despite the
Rent.
pain and the rent and everything. They still decided to commit their time to New York. And so once you realize that there's a community of Indian classical musicians and people who just really love Indian classical music, that was a very cool community to find. And there was no Raga Massive then. It was just like we were hanging out, and I mean, just to like mention some of the people: Neil Murgai, Arun Ramamurthy, Eric Fraser, Aaron Hansen, and then Jay Gandhi, then Abhik Mukherjee, Samarth Nagarkar, like, and then another wave like Aaron Schrag and David Ellenbogen, like, just really like it continued to sort of branch out and draw in people who were, I think that it resonated in different ways for different people. Some people just really were about Indian classical music, right?
So wait,
And-
what is happening when all the names you mentioned? You guys are just hanging out, like, or
Just
where are you?
jamming.
Yeah, we would just hang out and
And
jam,
jam.
and like we'd be
In
like,
a
"Oh, we're having a
house,
barbecue,
in a
come
bar.
on over." Like we would all just come
Oh.
over and hang out. We'd like talk about Indian music, just chat, like. And I mean, the arguments were great. It was like, Vilayat Khan Saab or Ravi Shankar.
Yeah.
Remember, they had a rivalry. Like, what was the rivalry?
Raif
Like,
Khan.
who knows the stories? Yeah, like that was our conversations, And
So
a lot
that's
of it-
awesome.
Yeah,
I
it
like
was
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
It was at bars. It was just like very casual, and then I think that we started thinking to ourselves like, we should just be playing music, and we should create a space for ourselves where we can play Indian classical music. When we're on a set break, it's not like they're putting on some other music on the system. It's Indian classical music on the system until we play again, and we sort of started being like, we as Indian classical musicians, like any new person, like we just met today, we can play together.
Of course.
Call the rag, call the tal, we can play together. That was so similar to the jazz scene in New York, where you just call a jazz standard and you can play together, right? So that was a really cool connection, I think, that Raga Massive made, where like we can make a weekly gathering about Indian classical music, and it can be a session where people can meet each other, people can hand their business card to someone else, someone who's just coming to New York for a couple of days to play some Indian classical show, they can pop over to our thing and meet a bunch of people who are down with Indian classical music, right?
That's awesome.
So that was the idea of having like a jam session around Indian music and just have it be a casual hang. No one has to come in kurtas. No one has to worry about drinking a beer on stage. You know, like it was very like, it was just much more chill. Like we were able to shed a lot of the sort of contextual things that would maybe make people feel like they need to come to the table with some knowledge, or maybe would turn people off, you know?
Yeah.
Even simple things like don't point your feet at the stage. It's like, sure, like if we're gonna do a traditional concert in a traditional concert hall, we're gonna tell you not to point your feet at the stage. But if we're at a bar, or if we're at some place and you're just like chilling and you're laying down on your back because you're listening to the music, we're not going to harsh you. You know what I mean? Maybe someone will tell you at the end, hey, just so you know, the cultural kind of context here is not to point feet. Like, you know, it's really like, unlike someone like maybe, you know, Pandit Jasraj, who would like just shut down the concert, like, you know, if you do something like that, right? Yeah. So like that scope, rather than having it go more towards like the hardcore conservative, where it's like you're going to like make sure people like stay in line, versus being like, you know what, let's shed all those preconceived notions, come as you are.
Which, by the way, is, I think, a major... all of the Indian classical music organizations
are dying.
are dying in America.
Because of
when I grew up in my, like, you know, when I'm from, you know, 5 to 18 or 20, I'd say, the Indian classical music, they were big.
Yeah.
Like, Music Circle was putting on shows with like 3,000 people, and like, they were big.
Yeah.
And that was the thing to do. And like, people were donating money and stuff that weren't even into the music, but because it was the thing to do, it was the thing to do.
Yeah.
But they had these strict conservative policies, and like, and then when the guy that's running it is he started when he was 30, but then he became 55 and 60. Yeah. And then he's like talking down to the 18-year-olds.
Right.
It's not going to work.
Totally not.
And then I think that's the death of it. Like,
I mean, I think in the process of trying to like classicalize something or make it like a fine art, like you sort of lose sight of the fact that this is really folk music, right? Like so, like especially something like Santur, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like it just resonates at such a visceral level, like for people, you know? It's like you don't want to have it be about the clothes or about how you sit or anything, right? Like if you really want it to hit people, you have to be able to kind of meet them halfway. Yeah. And in the States, like that's just like knowing younger people, right? Like to be able to say, and that's I think what Raga Massive does is like we think about it. We're like, what would we want to see? What would our friends want to see, right? How can we get the biggest number of people to come out and still have it be legit Indian classical music, you know? Yeah. So I think that like respect towards Indian classical music is kind of there, but there's also a little bit of a acknowledgement of like an irreverence that's natural with like being young and being from the States and also just like being a creative musician. Like in a way, as an artist, you have to be a little bit irreverent to push the envelope, right? To be able to break out of the box, there has to be a measure of just like, you know, saying fuck it, you know, and go for it, and have people look at you and be like, hey, you can't do that. You can't play something with
everybody that
every big musician that ever made it, that's what they did.
That's what they did.
Yeah.
Shivji was like, F you guys, I'm playing Santur. Right? Ravi Shankar was like, I'm doing this when my tabla player is going to play with me. He's not going to sit off to the side. Like we're going to crank it up. Right? Like,
but that's also very interesting. That's an interesting parallel because like to have there be a pushing of the envelope musically, right? Where you say Raviji and Alaraka Khan Saab are going to change the format of how they present the music a little bit. Yeah. It's funny to hear some of the critique that Raga Massive gets, right? So like to actually have us do a non-Indian classical piece, right? But have it be done by classical Indian instruments, right? So for example, I don't know if you've heard of Terry Riley.
Yeah, of course.
So Terry Riley's In C, right? Which is a very epic minimalist piece, which is a funny oxymoron actually. But like, it's basically kind of like little cells, 52, 53 little cells that everyone in the ensemble goes through kind of at their own rate, right? So the piece itself has a totally unique arc every time, but everyone generally follows a similar sort of collection of melodic cells. And to do that with Indian music is awesome because Terry Riley was into Indian music in a major way.
So. And beautiful.
So, yeah, and his compositions are very cool. Yeah. And there's a lot of people in Indian classical music who would not necessarily see that as contributing towards Indian classical music, right? People would see that as like some sort of departure from Indian classical music. But when I talk to my dad, let's say, who doesn't know Indian classical music but identifies as Indian, loves Indian music, and considers himself a lover of Indian classical music, he's not a musician per se, right? He hears that and he gets the connection. He hears the Indian music and the minimalist American Terry Riley idea, right?
Yeah.
For him, those two are having a dialogue in a sphere that resonates with Indian music, right? So it's interesting to think about how in one side you're expanding what Indian music can do or can mean or how it can reach people through essentially a dialogue with other kinds of music, right? Which is sort of what Ravi Ji did too. Like Ravi Ji was like a great ambassador of music. He collaborated with so many people. And by doing that, he really expanded what Indian classical music can mean to people, right? And it's not like you have to be in the 100% camp of, pure rag, pure tal, and only within that can you expand the meaning.
Yeah.
Of Indian
Even
music.
somebody like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan Sahab, he did so many collaborations.
Yeah.
And you don't know anyone that doesn't know Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan.
Exactly.
He played in Walmart, he played at all these amazing places and just spread. It is quality, it is classical music.
That's
but
right, of
You
course.
can bop your head to it.
Right. And all you're doing is bringing it to somebody who's kind of like ready for it,
Exactly, yeah.
Even if in a group of 100 people, if there's one person in there who hears that santur or hears Nusrat Ji's voice and is like, that does it, right? They're suddenly like up, they're awake, they get it, right? Like that is such a profound thing. And
Of
even
course.
1 out of 100 people, if that can happen, that is for Indian music, right? That has created a person who has felt Indian music.
Yeah.
I also find that like the conservative classical purists, we can call them, they don't know what they're talking about, like at all.
Also,
Watch
they're
it,
probably
Jess,
the
watch it.
middle tier, right?
Yeah, like so. For example, I mean, we won't say his name, but somebody came up to me and said, "Tari Khan Saab's, whenever he plays classical, it's really, really just light music."
Light music. And we're looking at
Cheat.
his
And
face.
I said like thanks for being straight up about it with me, right? Rather than like talking about my back. But I said, can you show me, right? Like because everything's on YouTube these days. I was like, can you pull it up? So he pulls up something, and like Ustad Ji's like accompanying a well-known sarangi player, and then he's playing. He forwards it to his solo, and he's like playing. I remember the exact bowl. It's like so he's playing in 12ths of beats, and it's like it's like to me it's a pure classical. The tihai that was like a different volta thing, and I go, okay, can you put on a tabla player that you think is
Playing
doing
pure.
classical, right? And like this was a gamble that I took, and he put somebody on. Right, I'm not gonna get into names, but like he put it on because I have respect for this tabla player too. But the clip that he put on was a rela, and I said, and it was like then you double it, right?
What child is that?
And I said, I said that sounds like light garba to me.
Yeah,
And
totally.
the other thing sounded classical to me.
Yeah.
He's like, well.
let me get another one.
And then he's like, let me get another one. So
So
then
he
he
tries
put a
to pull up
different
another
tabla
one.
player, and we're talking like the top 5 tabla players. In the world.
Sure.
He put a different tabla player, and like I'm 2 for 2 now because it's another rela. And I go, dude. And I said, okay, find another one of Ustadji's, and then like, but with classical. And I said, like, here's what you guys don't get. Like, Ustadji separates his light and classical.
Completely.
When he plays his light, it'll be afterwards, just like when she plays like Bahari or
Bahari,
Badvi
yeah.
or Bidu
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And it'll be after.
Yeah.
And I said during, it's like he's not going to do it.
Right.
And then he's like, oh. So I was like, and then that's just one example of countless in like these classical purists that will say like, oh, Naladri played like a ga when he shouldn't have played a ga. You're like,
Right.
dude, what are you talking about?
No,
You're
it's
wrong.
so funny. I mean, it's like it cracks me up even
Yeah.
more when we're like pushing almost. Like when we're actually doing something really creative, and then like the classical purists are like nitpicking away at it, you know?
Yeah.
It's like just chill. Like I know how to play a proper tihai. Like I know when
You're
this
just
rag is
trying.
we're doing something more creative here. Like
I follow stand-up comedy a lot, and then there was this comedian that I loved. His name was Patrice O'Neill, and he was on an argument with somebody about a joke's being offensive, or like that this was an offensive joke. And he said, what you don't realize is that a good joke and a bad joke start at the same place and like have the same development arc, and at the end it may not work or it works. There's nothing different you can do. So none of us go into a studio and we're like, dude, I'm gonna totally mess with like people and like just make the worst music today, and like I'm gonna make this track suck. Right? Like nobody goes into a studio to do that.
No.
You all go like, oh, we have this idea.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys were like, oh, we can do Santur, but like no, Max ZT is here. Let's use his like hammer dulcimer and like let's see if we can do something. And like I just threw his name out because he's a friend of ours.
No, totally. And I think you're totally right.
Right.
Like
nobody
for us to be open to that.
We don't go into a thing like going like we're trying to break rules. All we're doing, whether
being
like
creative.
we're just being creative. So whether she's gonna do like a rag, like I don't know, Purya Tanashri alap, or she's like, oh, I got to do this like hip hop track.
Right.
It's the same process. It's the
All
same.
coming from the same place.
If she has to tune her satur, she's got to like turn the mics on. She's got to do the same. It's.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, there's been like a really interesting sort of end of the story to this day, I guess I should say, where I'm kind of bringing together drum set and tabla into a hybrid kit. So I'll have like a regular drum set setup with like hi-hat, bass drum, and the drum kit, and then I'll put a daya on the right side of my seat and a baya on the left side of my feet, so I can just drop my hands to my sides and I can play like that. So it's like a split hand sort of. I mean, like not split hand. Split hand actually means something specific for percussionism. But it's like one arm here, one arm here. It's not like the tabla are in front of me. And I remember it taking a long time for me to like sort of find a way, like what is it I'm looking for here, right? Like do I really want to do this? This is extremely hard what I'm trying to do. Why am I doing this, right? But I felt, first of all, very, very encouraged by some critical musicians who I have so much respect for, right? Like non-Indian classical musicians, jazz musicians, who to me, they reinforce that idea, which you see in a lot of jazz musicians, which is that you can jump, like you just jump, you know, and say, like Wayne Shorter says, like, I dare you. That's jazz music, right? So like you can kind of do anything if you can tap into that essence, right? And in that way, it's very much like Indian classical music, right? Because despite the ascending and the descending scale and all the swaras and any tihai or any mukra, if you just play those few notes that has the pakad phrase, those specific lines, that's it. You're done. You know, that's like something that a child who's 6 years old, if they learn that phrase compared to a 50-year-old person who's been playing and never learned the phrase, that kid will get to it quicker than the older person. You know what I mean? It's like to get to that essential with jazz music, any tool is available. Any tool you can think of will get you there, right? So for me, it was like the tabla was something I was really, really getting inside me, right? Drum set, I came back to drum set and thinking of it in a completely different way, right? Like I actually kind of now I love splitting my drum set and my tabla. So like my right hand will be on a daya, and my left hand will be on the drums, right? And so I can actually play a tabla bowl like, you know, and I'll do all like the left hand bowls will be like on the snare drum, and the right hand bowls will be on the daya. Or I'll switch them, and my left hand bowls will be on the baya, and my right hand will be on a cymbal.
That's pretty cool.
So it's taken years of like trusting that there is some sort of like music there that I know is there, right? And despite like so many people being like, you're compromising your tabla sound or you're compromising your drum set sound, it's like, no, like they're both, this is a sound, like them both together. And of course I practice drum set by itself. I practice tabla by itself very seriously. Like the two streams are very deep, you know, but there is this place where I can kind of like bring them both together and really experiment and take big risks. And usually I save that for very spontaneous, free improvisational settings, like real jazz settings where there's no chart necessarily, and it's just like wide open. So I really do believe in that risk taking. You know, I think
risk taking is a major.
That's how the music is going to grow.
Yeah. I mean that's a word that my Ustad uses a lot and has
Mine
told
too.
us and hers too, is like take risks.
Take risks and enjoy.
Yeah,
So,
I think people respond to that. I know we're wrapping up,
Yeah.
but I'm just going to keep talking, Jess.
Yeah, so we should probably wrap up. I mean, we could keep talking for the podcast, but let me just give you a chance to like go ahead and spit out your social media handles.
So
and
my
where can people find
website
you?
is sameergupta.com, sameergupta.com. A lot of my social media handles are under Tabla Jazz. So Instagram /Tabla Jazz, Twitter /Tabla Jazz, and Facebook /Tabla Jazz.
Yeah, everybody should check Sameer out. He's an amazing musician, and as we're finding out, a tremendous person. We can keep talking forever, but let me just wrap up the Dash radio
segment.
with Ruckus Avenue Radio. You guys can find us at absolutefocus.co, and all our social media stuff will be from there. And also, if you can throw us some support on patreon.com/absolutefocus, that'd be great. Thanks, guys.